Good evening. And welcome back, everyone. I'm Graham INSCOE, and for today's character breakdown, we're pulling back the curtain on Mr.Strings, a devil bound to a body of wood, a child's toy suddenly possessed of malice and magic, or perhaps both of these things and more. Before we dive into our Custom Lineage Shadow Sorcerer, make sure you check the description for the links to Mr.Strings' backstory video and to all of his free downloadable character sheets, so you have an idea of what the hells we're talking about. Mr.Strings is definitely an oddball, even alongside our goblinoid time wizards, dragon-scaled troubadours, and deranged toucan clerics. Mechanically, he's as straightforward as they come. A sorcerer with a penchant for twisting shadows and flames to his bidding, using his force of will to manifest immense damage and support in the form of obscuring buffs and debuffs. That said, he's a talking doll, and a devil of at least some infamy. He is a being trapped in an unfamiliar body and an unfamiliar world, trudging forward day after day as the identity of Baelagor, Archon of Dis, becomes slowly subsumed into that of Mr.Strings, friend of Lucy. Even as the specifics of his time in the hells fade against the ache in his heart, he is acutely aware of the diminishment of his powers, and the cruelty of his old life still shines through in his approach to the world, even if it is now a cruelty of habit and of vague memory, and not one of desire. This strange living puppet is a monstrous force, a threat to any he deems an inconvenience. And yet more and more, he is also a creature of great loneliness and pain, desperate for company or kindred spirits, even as he lashes out with hellfire at the slightest provocation. A being of great contradictions, at his heart, Mr.Strings merely wants what so many of us want: closure, acceptance, and a clear path forward. Getting him to admit that to himself and to others, however, is a task almost as Herculean as his goal of tracking down the young sorceress Lucy and freeing himself from the chains that bind him to this plane and body. He is a wild card, cruel and careless, but charismatic and lonely, and he could certainly be shaped and guided in such a way as to utilize his powers for good, or at least for profit. He just needs some patient adventurers to show him the way. Strings might not be the most sociable of sorcerers, but he is aimless and alone, and certainly sees the wisdom in traveling alongside a party of adventurers with a knack for handling trouble. Players bringing Mr.Strings to the table should embrace his chaotic nature and enjoy jumping between his tendency towards violence and casual cruelty and his desires to be accepted. Just be careful that you don't take it too far. A party might forgive the suggestion of torturing captured foes, but they almost certainly won't mess around with a companion who burns down orphanages for shits and giggles. Playing a character with a tendency towards evil can be a lot of fun, but they have to have enough redeemable qualities to stick around with the party. Remember that evil doesn't equal stupid, and if Mr.Strings wishes to gain power and influence and see his goals out, he needs to avoid being slain by angry mobs of guardsmen and adventurers. And again, remember that deep down, this puppet is a bit of a softie. Approach him with some grace and lean into the moments that draw out the soul from this devilish wooden sorcerer. Now, let's address the fact that there is most certainly not a living doll species in Dungeons & Dragons. While we considered building Mr.Strings as a warforged or even an auto-gnome to reflect his status as a non-biological entity, in the end we felt that utilizing the custom lineage option found in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything best reflected the character we wanted to portray. This grants us a +2 to 1 ability score, a small creature size, 30 feet of walking speed, and a couple of more variable traits. Given the choice between dark vision and a skill proficiency, we selected the latter, as Mr.Strings has other means of seeing in the dark. And perhaps most importantly, we selected a feat for Stringsy to start the game with. By selecting a half feat in Shadow Touched, we enabled him to start the game with a crazy high charisma modifier, and while the free first level spell options granted by the feat are a little lacking, free invisibility from level 1 is a hell of a trick, and additionally ties into Mr.Strings' aesthetics and sorceress origin. Now, as to level 1 itself, Charisma is a sorcerer's primary ability score, directly influencing their ability to cast spells and manipulate the weave. By placing all possible points into Charisma, Mr.Strings can get his ability score up to 17, and with Shadow Touch adding an extra point, it brings him all the way up to 18 and a +4 modifier at level 1. The drawback to this approach, of course, is that we're trading power for versatility. With the points we have remaining, we can take one stat to 14, and we're putting that +2 modifier into Constitution, in the hopes that it'll help Mr.Strings maintain his concentration on big spells. We can safely leave strength at an 8, he's a puppet, his arms are literally wood. And we'll put 2 points into Dexterity just to avoid a negative initiative modifier. This leaves us with enough points to put Intelligence at a 13 and Wisdom at a 12, both of which result in +1 modifiers. Sorcerers have proficiency in Charisma and Constitution saving throws, and the latter of those makes them the envy of those nerd-ass wizards and casters everywhere. There aren't tons of backgrounds that made a lot of sense for our wee puppet, but the Haunted One background from Curse of Strahd seems close enough. Between that, the Sorcerer class, and our Lineage skill proficiency, Mr.Strings has proficiency in the Arcana, Religion, Intimidation, Deception, and Stealth skills. Additionally, the former Dread Archon is fluent in Common, Infernal, Halfling, and Elvish. He starts the game with a light crossbow or a quarterstaff, neither of which he should ever consider using, and an arcane focus. Perhaps a staff or rod of scorched wood, pulled from the wreckage of Lucy's home. And doubling back to the Shadow-touched feat, once per day, Mr.Strings can cast Inflict Wounds and Invisibility, without expanding a spell slot. That's all the innate character creation, so let's take a look at our sorcerer level by level. The primary feature available to all level 1 sorcerers is, of course, spellcasting. But for now, suffice it to say that he can do just that. Cast spells using his charisma score. Additionally, at level 1, sorcerers start things out with their subclass, or sorceress origin, and in Mr.Strings' case, that means shadow sorcery. For now, that grants him 2 features. Eyes of the Dark, which for now grants Strings dark vision out to 120 feet, and Strength of the Grave, which allows our puppet to make a Constitution saving throw to remain at 1 HP when he would otherwise be reduced to 0. The level 2 feature, Font of Magic, grants our sorcerer a pool of sorcery points equivalent to their sorcerer level, which they use to manipulate the castings and the effects of their spells. At level 2, they're only useful for converting into spell slots, but level 3 brings us the Meta Magic feature, which allows Mr.Strings to start expending sorcery points to induce various effects on his spells. We start with 2 options, and Mr.Strings is taking Quickened and Subtle spells. Quicken allows Mr.Strings to change the casting of a spell from an action to a bonus action, allowing him to throw an extra cantrip or other action onto the same turn that he casts a leveled spell. Subtle spell allows him to cast any spell without using its somatic or verbal components, or in other words, without any of the gestures or incantations that would otherwise be obvious indicators of spell casting. This allows Mr.Strings to sow confusion or manipulate others in social encounters without drawing attention to himself, and also acts as an ace up the sleeve when facing off with foes utilizing counterspell against him. Additionally, at this level, Eyes of the Dark now allows our puppet mage to cast the Darkness spell, with the option of casting it with 2 sorcery points instead of a spell slot, and being able to see through said magical darkness. 4th level is an ability score increase, and we're maxing out our charisma at 20 or a +5 modifier, leaning into the idea of the sheer power contained within this fragile wooden body. We also have an optional feature at 4th level in Sorceress Versatility, which, if allowed by your DM, enables Mr.Strings to swap out either a meta magic option or a cantrip whenever he gains an ASI through the Sorcerer class. Level 5 comes with some fun new spell options, but as far as features go, all we have here is another optional feature, Magical Guidance, which allows Strings to re-roll a failed ability check at the cost of 1 sorcery point. At level 6, things start to get a little more interesting. The Shadow Sorcerer feature, Hound of Ill Omen, allows Mr.Strings to summon a shadowy, modified direwolf that hones in on a target within 120 feet of Strings himself, at the cost of 3 sorcery points and a bonus action. The Hound moves on its own initiative, always knows the location of its target, can move through creatures and objects, and can only move towards its targets, attacking it and granting the target disadvantage on all saves against Mr.Strings spells, so long as the Hound remains within 5 feet of the target. Not much happens at level 7, and with our level 8 ASI, we're picking up the Metamagic Adept feat. This feat grants Mr.Strings 2 additional sorcery points that can only be used on metamagic as opposed to flexible casting, and 2 additional metamagic options. Twin Spell allows the Shadowy Mage to target a second target with a single target spell, costing 1 point per spell level, and Heightened Spell allows him to force a creature to roll a save against a given spell with disadvantage, at the cost of 3 sorcery points, which is perfect for when you really need to paralyze or immolate a particular foe. Level 9 is yet another dead level, features-wise, and at level 10 we're picking up one final metamagic option, Empowered Spell, which allows us to spend 1 sorcery point and reroll 1 of the damage dice dealt by any given spell. Now, we've talked a lot about ways that sorcerers can manipulate their spells, but not a lot about what spells Mr.Strings has at his disposal. So let's change that. Sorcerers have similar spell lists to wizards, both being arcane fullcasters, but unlike wizards, sorcerers innately know all of their spells and have a smaller pool to choose from than wizards do. As stated previously, their spell save DC and spell attack modifier are based on their charisma stats, and they start the game with 4 cantrips known. Firebolt is on brand and a potent, reliable ranged damage option, whereas Mind Sliver is a closer range spell, but targets a saving throw instead of armor class, and has the potential to reduce the target's next saving throw. With damage more than covered, our remaining selections are Message to enable private short-range communication, and Mending for managing scratches and splinters. We select 2 first-level spells at this level, but we will also remind players that they have Inflict Wounds and Invisibility at their disposal thanks to Shadow Touched, even though technically Strings can't cast Invisibility with spell slots until level 3. With that in mind, our level 1 spell selections are Burning Hands and Mage Armor. Burning Hands puts some area of effect fire damage into Stringsy's kit, and Mage Armor gives him something resembling a functional armor class. At level 2, we're picking up either Silvery Barbs or Shield, as always, dependent on whether your DM allows Silvery Barbs or not. Assuming they do, this spell allows Mr.Strings to use his reaction to force disadvantage onto an enemy making an attack, save, or ability check within 60 feet, and then granting advantage on the same to an ally within 60 feet, or to Mr.Strings himself. At 3rd level, we add Darkness to our list via Shadow Sorcery, and we've also got Invisibility on our 2nd level spell list, but we additionally pick up Hold Person here, adding a potent debuff and damage multiplier to encounters with humanoid foes. At character level 4, we add the short-range teleport Misty Step to our list, an almost must-have option for characters with access to it, and the Minor Illusion cantrip, which does precisely what it says it does. Then, at PC level 5, we gain access to 3rd level spells, and with a Shadow and Flame-themed blaster on our hands, the only choice here is Fireball, dealing damage comparable to higher level spells, while also giving our former devil a nice nostalgic reminder of his former home. At level 6, we pick up Counterspell, and it's worth noting that a subtle counterspell cannot be counterspelled in turn, as there is no indication to the enemy spellcaster as to what canceled the initial spell being cast. As such, subtle counterspell is one of the best ways to shut down enemy casters playing defensively, in addition to just subtly casting your spells in the first place. All that said, there are plenty of excellent spells available to Mr.Strings at this level, and if enemy casters are not a major concern in your campaign, consider picking up Slow, Hypnotic Pattern, or Fly instead of Counterspell. With level 7 comes 4th level spells, and to start with, we're selecting Greater Invisibility, a twinnable concentration spell that allows the target or targets to retain their invisibility even after attacking or casting a spell, potentially providing a sustained source of advantage in combat to Strings himself or to multiple allies. At level 8, we're picking up another concentration spell, this time an AoE in the form of Sickening Radiance. Creatures entering the sphere for the first time or starting their turns there are forced to make a Constitution saving throw or take a moderate amount of radiant damage and suffer a point of exhaustion. It is far from applicable in every situation, but if Mr. Strings' party has a ways to force enemies to stay in place in the sphere, those points of exhaustion can quickly add up to be utterly debilitating for a whole horde of enemies. Level 9 finally brings us access to 5th level spells, and here we're picking up Hold Monster, enabling the paralysis effect of Hold Person to be applied to creatures of all types. And finally, at level 10, Mr. Strings is grabbing Animate Objects, granting him the ability to bring anywhere from one huge statue or building block to a swarm of kitchen knives to life. And as ridiculous as it may seem, a sculpture providing mobile cover or brute strength can help one's party to survive otherwise impassable situations. And if you save up your money, you can absolutely decimate foes and structures alike with a swarm of animate adamantine darts. Or if you're really evil, you can animate some puppet friends to terrify your foes. Really, the possibilities are limited only by imagination. And in the devilish landscape of Mr. Strings' mind, imagination runs wicked and deep. All in all, that about covers it for our animate puppet sorcerer. Mr. Strings is a being of innate cruelty, begging for exposure to compassion. An arrogant and violent mage of fire and shadow with an almost unparalleled gift for imposing his magical will onto the world around him. Trapped in his body of wood, crusading against the forces that trapped him there, Strings is nevertheless a valuable addition to any party in need of a spellcaster who lowers their foes' defenses and exploits those openings with ruthless efficiency and casual power. We hope this video helped explain the interplay between Mr. Strings' character and his mechanics, and we hope even more that he'll make his way to some of your tables, spreading chaos, immolating foes, and tugging on heartstrings in a way only a rejected toy ever could. See y'all next time.